By-elections are an opportunity to punch the government in the nose. And in Copeland, where hospital services are under threat, an issue which obviously cut through, and yet people still went out and voted for the Conservatives. A seat which has been Labour since the 1930s. I've seen the comforting memes and the comforting graphs on Twitter. This is a long-term decline. Every election in the last few years, the Labour share of the vote has gone down. That's true. But this is a by-election. You don't compare by-elections to general elections.
You'd have to go back more than a century to find an example of a governing party taking a seat from the opposition party in an election like this.
Did some of that rot set in under New Labour? Of course it did, with Copeland. Of course it did. But the whole point of the Corbyn project was to reverse that. Not to have a situation where in a by-election we're losing seats where, yes, there was disillusionment under previous Labour governments to the Conservatives. Others say, hang on a minute, under Ed Miliband, Labour lost Bradford West. Yeah, they did, not to the Conservatives, they lost that to George Galloway's Respect Party. We're talking about a swing to the government. And in any case, Ed Miliband not only lost that by-election, he went on to lose the general election badly.
To those of you who came to Stoke-on-Trent to sow hatred and division and to turn us away from our friends and neighbours, I have one very simple message. You have failed.
Well, thank goodness UKIP were defeated. If they'd got a toehold in Parliament, that could have been the beginning for them, sweeping across working class heartlands in the Midlands and in the North. Honestly, how low do we have to set our expectations? We're not supposed to be losing by-elections full stop. That's not what oppositions do. It was said, quite rightly, during that by-election, that one of the great advantages of a mass membership is that every door in Stoke-on-Trent Central was knocked on, which is an amazing success. But there was still a swing to the Conservatives in that seat during a by-election, despite having a mass membership. Those who say, if we've got a mass membership, that will mean that we can sweep to victory on that basis. Well, Stoke shows, as things stand, that's nowhere near enough. Whenever I talk about polling, people say to me, well, Owen, polling's wrong. I get this all the time. But we've just seen in those by-elections that the polling was right. In fact, by some measurements, what happened in Copeland is worse than the average of polling that Labour has at the moment, which is terrible. Polling is sometimes wrong, no question. It was wrong in 2015, and the other infamous polling disaster was 1992.
And now our exit poll, based on talking to lots...
And in both cases, the actual result was significantly worse for Labour than the polling suggested.
It is now 10 o'clock, and here's our exit poll. We're predicting the Tories on 316.
And if you look at the underlying polling, where in a two-horse race for preferred Prime Minister, with Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn comes third, behind Don't Know. On trust on the economy, we could go on.
Together, we are very, very strong.
A lot of people will go, you're just trying to demoralise people who were enthused and excited by what the Labour leadership was meant to represent. But let me just spell out, and let me just spell it out this in the most stark way possible, what will happen if Labour suffer a calamitous election defeat, which every bit of evidence is currently pointing towards.
Have you looked in the mirror and asked yourself this question: could the problem actually be me?
No.
Jeremy Corbyn will resign. He'll definitely resign after that. And what will happen is, having lost so many seats, dozens of seats to the Conservatives, there will be anger and fury. The left will be blamed. Those who oppose the left within the Labour Party will go, look what happens when the left take over. The near destruction of this great party and all of its achievements. There will not be the nominations to get anybody else on the ballot paper. MPs will not do that again.
The moronic MPs who nominated Jeremy Corbyn to have a debate
it includes John Crudders,
need their heads felt.
The Labour Party will hurtle off to the right. Many of the policies that we support, and which the polling shows that most people in this country support, all of those policies will be buried with Jeremy Corbyn. Taxing the rich, investing in the economy, not cuts, public ownership. You'll be shouted down. We tried that. Look what happened. The political atmosphere in this country for anyone with vaguely progressive opinions will be miserable. I've got Keir Hardie on my wall over there, the first leader of the Labour Party. The Labour Party was set up to represent and champion the needs, the ambitions, the aspirations of the majority of people in this country, the real wealth creators, the people who keep this country ticking day after day. And they've already gone through the longest fall in living standards since the 19th century. Their plight will get worse. We'll get a transformation of society in the interest even more of the people at the top, with extra xenophobia thrown in for good measure. I went to a refugee camp. Those refugees will not be welcome, any of them, under this Conservative government, which has already turned its back on little kids. People will die as a consequence. That can't be allowed to happen. Now, to say that I'm pretty anxious about doing this video is understating it, because political debate in this country now is so poisonous. And it's poisonous because of Brexit, it's poisonous as well within the context of the Labour Party and the left. And you have extremes on both sides. On the one hand, I've got people on the left who say I'm a right-wing careerist, sellout, that I've never really been left-wing, that the Guardian are telling me what to do or say. And then you've got the other side, the anti-Corbyn militant opposition. And they demand constantly, on a daily basis, repent, repent, repent. You are partly, in large part, responsible for what's happened to the Labour Party. And that just goes to show that they don't even understand why they lost in the first place. That they had no vision, no strategy, and no route map to power of their own. They had nothing left to say. And when Jeremy Corbyn stood against those three candidates back in 2015, well, he didn't win, they lost. Because they had no compelling, coherent vision whatsoever. What I'm saying here isn't some savage attack on Jeremy Corbyn. I know Jeremy Corbyn. I've known him for years. I've shared many a platform with him. And he's a decent, honourable, principled, and in many ways courageous man. He took stands in the 1980s, over and over again, that placed him on the right side of history. He got arrested for campaigning against apartheid when Margaret Thatcher was calling the ANC terrorists. He was campaigning for LGBT rights when it seemed as loony left to do so. He opposed the Iraq War on the basis it would be a calamity, and so it was. A lot of the problems Labour has are structural, if you like. They predate Jeremy Corbyn by quite a long way. All over the Western world, social democratic parties and so-called centre-left parties are in crisis. In Britain, there's the collapse of the Labour Party in Scotland. The heartland of the Labour Party and Labour movement, making it very difficult for Labour to win a general election. Brexit, which would challenge even the most capable and experienced Labour leader. Where you have a Labour heartland like Hackney, where about 80% of people voted Remain, and then another Labour heartland like Doncaster, where about 70% of people voted to leave. Where some Labour voters think Brexit is the worst thing that has ever happened, they're despondent, they're miserable, it's a nightmare. And then you've got other Labour voters who think they've got their country back. How do you keep that coalition together? And now that Brexit's going to happen, you've got much of the UKIP vote just defecting over to the Conservatives, boosting their poll ratings. You've got a growing generational divide, with every single general election in this ageing population of ours, more and more older people voting for the Conservatives, and they actually come out and vote. If you take out pensioners, which successive Labour leaderships have increasingly failed to convince, then Labour would actually have a shot at winning a general election. Then there's the growing division between Labour's working class base and often university educated, tend to be younger people who live in big cities. Labour did hemorrhage working class support under New Labour. That's absolutely right. The problem is that trend has continued to accelerate. There's the fact that Labour allowed itself to lose the debate over why the crisis we're in began. Not because of Labour spending money on schools and hospitals, but because of the banks. And because they failed to win that argument, Labour can easily be dismissed, portrayed as a spendthrift party.
It wrecked our economy once and would do so again.
All of these would be problems, whoever is leader. The problem is that the leadership is not only not dealing with them, but they're actually making them worse. Now, many people who passionately support Jeremy Corbyn, when they look at the current position, they talk about two big factors: the media and the role of the Parliamentary Labour Party, not least the abortive coup last year. If we look at our press is largely run by a very small group of very right-wing media moguls who defend the status quo of which they are part. If you're on the left and you want to change society, the media are always going to come and get you. But you've got to have a strategy to deal with that. And that strategy has been very sorely lacking.
You know, Jeremy, that I wasn't part of any coup in the Labour Party.
And then there's the coup. Look, there's no question at all that the ridiculous, outrageous coup attempt at a time of national crisis, Brexit, made things worse. People looked at Labour, partly went, what a mess, not voting for that. But can we just be honest with ourselves? In the poll averages, not cherry-picking some individual poll, the polling average, that's what matters, Labour has never been ahead. Not since 2015, before the last general election. And what's even worse is Labour's polling has continued to get worse since the coup. Let's not kid ourselves. MPs are not squabbling about Jeremy Corbyn in public. They've just taken a vow of silence. So to pin Labour's continued fall, not stagnation, fall in polling since the coup, it's just not credible to keep saying it's all the work of the Parliamentary Labour Party. A lot of people listen to this and go, why didn't you back Owen Smith last time? I like Owen Smith on a personal level, but just his commitment to overturning the result of the referendum and the fact he refused to rule out joining the Euro and the Schengen Agreement, it'd be swapping one electoral disaster for a disaster which could be even worse.
Jeremy Corbyn, 251,000.
Thinking back to 2015, Jeremy Corbyn stood out a sense of duty. He thought that if the left didn't put up a candidate after a terrible election defeat at a time of so much crisis, then that's the end of the left. And the point was to stand, to put policies on the agenda, to shift the debate in a different direction, build up a grassroots movement, then maybe in a few years' time we'd have somebody else on the left who could stand and win and become Prime Minister. So when it was clear he was going to win, I was beyond desperate to try and find ways to make it work. Personally, probably, I saw him as a transitional figure. But in any case, whatever happened, to try and have a strategy which would deal with what would be an astonishingly difficult situation. I've written a very long blog about what strategy a Jeremy Corbyn leadership would have to pursue if it was going to work. Now, were all those ideas right? No, of course they're not. You know, you might read them and think they're all a load of nonsense. But it was an attempt to try and find a way to make it work. If there was one big piece of advice that I gave and others gave, it was about first impressions. When you get a new leader of a political party, a lot of people go, all right then, who's this guy? What's he about? If it's a bad first impression, it's very difficult to shift.
Yes, we did!
To say that Jeremy Corbyn becoming leader was chaotic is an understatement. And in those first few weeks, several mistakes were made which cut through. Because the Tories were so keen to portray them as a threat to national security, that played into that rhetoric. One of the central rules in politics is if you do not define yourself, you will be defined by your opponents. And the Conservatives get this. They are ruthless. They get messages and they stick to them.
My friends, we cannot let that man inflict his security-threatening, terrorist-sympathising, Britain-hating ideology on this country we love.
And they define their opponents as being extremists who are threats to national security and shambolic and incompetent. And often the way that Labour has behaved has, frankly, made that narrative quite easy to weave.
I brought him along Mao's little red book.
There are lots of things I'm wrong about, but to this day, it still seems obvious that you should have clear messages that resonate with people's everyday needs and ambitions, which are spoken in a language they understand. And if you ask people out there what Labour's policies are, I think you're going to get quite a lot of blank faces. Already people are blaming the media. I know you're blaming the media, aren't you? Yes, despite how aggressive and so on the media is, if you have a clear message which you stick to and policies which you stick to and they're presented in a way that people understand, they will cut through despite an aggressive media. And that hasn't happened. I genuinely felt that the leadership would listen, or the people in the leadership would listen to a variety of voices, not just me, but I don't think they were listened to. Far more could have been done and far more people could have been listened to make it something that was workable. Where we've ended up at is a failure of strategy, of communication and of messaging that never needed to happen. It just didn't. It would be so much easier for me not to say what I'm saying here. It's going to upset a lot of people who are pretty close to me. I'm saying this because I believe passionately in a Labour Party that is genuinely radical, that can transform society, rid it of the injustices that define it, a country where the next generation will be worse off than the last, where services are being decimated, where most people in poverty are in work, where you've got pensioners shivering in homes, where disabled people are having their benefits slashed away, where the future for this country increasingly is one of this awful right-wing xenophobic populism. It doesn't have to be like that. And to watch this happen, not because of the things that I believe in, but just, I'm afraid, a failure of competence and of communication and strategy is heartbreaking. Now, a lot of people on the right, a lot of people who oppose the things I believe in are going to pounce on all of this and weaponise it if you like. But I tell you what, they won't weaponise it even 1% of what they will do if Labour suffers a terrible election defeat. People have to ask themselves, are they attached to a cause? To a set of beliefs, the noble cause of the left, of ridding society of oppression and exploitation and bigotry and injustice, and building a society run in the interest of the majority, not a playground for bankers and tax dodgers and all the rest? Are they attached to that cause? Or are they attached to an individual? Either the leadership now comes up with a clear strategy to deal with the existential crises that I've just outlined. And when I say a clear strategy, I don't mean platitudes about taking the fight to the Tories. I mean actually, in concrete terms, spelt out, how will those existential challenges, which threaten the very existence of the Labour Party as a major national force able to change this country, how will they be addressed? And if Jeremy Corbyn, a decent, honourable, principled man, decides that he cannot address these challenges because only he can make that decision, then an agreement has to be made between him and the MPs who oppose him, where Jeremy Corbyn can stand down and somebody on the left is able to be on the ballot paper, someone from the new generation who's able to make a clear, compelling case in a way that resonates with people out there. If both sides are stubborn, then the risk is Labour will die. And none of that means surrendering a single thing that you believe in. The reason I'm saying this isn't to bury the idealism that drove the leadership election in 2015. It's to save it. It's to save that legacy. It's to stop it being covered in rubble, the rubble of a terrible Labour defeat. That the things that inspired so many of you to join the Labour Party, we can keep them. And not just keep them, but get a government that puts them into practice. But we won't be able to do that if we suffer a terrible defeat and the left won't have any political capital and could even be driven from the Labour Party altogether.
United, we can shape the future.
I'm not saying, he should stand down tomorrow or next week or next month or whenever. These are just my opinions. He has to take these decisions. But I am saying, if it is clear to him that he can't address these challenges, then, not in the distant future, there has to be a decision. If it all goes wrong in the way that I said it will, then there will be those of you who say it's the media's fault, it's the Parliamentary Labour Party, it's right-wing sellout careerists like me. That may be comforting. But how comforting will it be living through generations of right-wing Tory rule and watching your kids and your grandkids grow up? I don't think it will be very much comfort. We don't have to end up in that situation.
Is this the beginning of the Tory takeover of the North West, you think?
Without power, all we have is words. And those words can be emotive and compelling and powerful and indignant. But they're just words. And words don't build houses that people can afford to live in. Words don't increase the minimum wage to a genuine living wage. Words don't renationalise the railways. The policies, the ideas that all of us believe in, I believe are more necessary than they've ever been. To change this country into a society run on the basis of people's needs and aspirations, not profit for a tiny elite. But if you think some of you now that I've sold out to the establishment, I'll just be honest with you. The establishment would love nothing more than this situation to continue. They can do exactly what they want. A genuine movement against the establishment means electing a radical Labour government that can do things. Yes, backed up with movements out there. But at the moment, we're heading off a cliff. And we're heading off a cliff at full pelt, and some people think that as we go off the cliff, the car will suddenly sprout wings and we'll go off into the sunset. It's not going to happen.
That gives us hope. That gives us opportunity.
All of us have to make a decision. But whatever that decision is, let it be based on the future, not just of the left, not just of the Labour Party, but of this country and the tens of millions of people in it who deserve so much better.